first of all, welcome back to my colleagues, and welcome to all of you who've chosen to join us for this session. I'm going to suggest it's a smallish group. We're a couple dozen. Maybe the best strategy would be to unmute your microphones and just have a conversation. I'm going to ask my colleagues a question just to sort of kick off the discussion, very general question, and feel free to raise your hand, start speaking. No formal rules here, other than the lights just automatically went off in my office here in Ottawa. So while someone else is speaking, I'll rush out and turn them back on. We're very environmentally conscious here. So at 7 o'clock every day, the lights go off. Where I wanted to start was the larger question about what constitutes the new normal in post-secondary education. Are we moving clearly in the direction of a new normal? Will this have accelerated those trends that we've been all seeing for a long while? Or is this going to be a gap between where we were and maybe where we are again? So maybe if one of my panelists will start, and I'll go turn on the lights.
Well, I'm happy to begin, Michael, to give you a little reprieve. You can cast some light on the matter over there. I'm sort of the school who believes that what we mostly seen is a significant acceleration of the trends that were already there, with some new trends. But I think the trends that were already there have accelerated dramatically. And, you know, as we discussed in the panel, it's exposed the kind of the deep structural inequities that already existed, but have been thrown into much sharper relief right now. So, I know we are not returning to the status quo pre-pandemic, but we also look at pandemics historically and major events, including wars, and societies do return to some semblance of what things looked like previously, although in this instance, I think we will have to come to terms with these huge changes that were already underway in the world of work, in the economy, the incredible challenges around social inequity and the kind of social churn and the political churn that all created. So that's what I think we're dealing with. In terms of what's different and what's new, I don't think.
Can you throw the ball for Oli, please?
I don't.
He needs it so bad.
I don't think we really know quite yet what is new. In terms of the world of education, I think you're going to see much less of a boundary between in-person and online. I think the mode of delivery will certainly be more flexible moving forward. We discussed micro-credentials, things like that. But stuff is still emerging.
Would anybody like to weigh in specifically on this, or just address some concerns or questions that you have?
Well, Michael, I would maybe just add one thing while people are thinking about what they want to say, and that is that, and we spoke about this a little bit as well. One of the things that strikes me in particular is the gains that women have made in post-secondary education in the last 10 to 20 years, where women now, from almost all degrees, undergraduate degrees at the very least, get more degrees than men. And I think that's because explicitly or implicitly, I'm not sure which, women have recognized the value of education and its ability to sort of move you up in economic potential and that piece. And what I'm not sure about in long term, and I'd love to hear Phil or Chris's thoughts on this, or yours, Michael, is the degree to which this she session is going to maybe have a much disproportionate effect on some of those gains, and whether or not that will be lasting or if that will just be a blip, because it's a little bit challenging to sort of figure that out at this stage, 7 months in. But I do know that that it is disproportionately affecting both women professionals as well as female students. So.
And of course, women are disproportionately the primary caregivers, and when schools move to even a model where only part of the time those kids might go to school, that takes women out of the workplace, or at least makes their life much more challenging. So certainly in the short term, there's going to be impact. And Phil mentioned earlier, and I certainly agree with this, there's really no doubt that this is not an equal opportunity pandemic. It affects different groups in different ways, and it has clearly affected young people, persons of color, underrepresented populations, and I suspect women much more than middle-class males.
Yeah, and just picking up on that point, and I see Chris has written in the chat, I was going to make the same point, but social investments are going to be absolutely critical as part of this recovery, in particular in areas like childcare. And just thinking about student financial aid and the flexibility around student financial aid, I think it's going to be absolutely key. And also how we structure ourselves. Deb and I were on a Universities Canada call, she mentioned earlier today, and there was an example of a student at the University of Southern New Hampshire, and the president was talking about how, to a certain point, when you looked at her transcript, there were just a whole bunch of fails. And when he interrogated her about that, or when he questioned her about that, it was because she was caring for a young daughter who had some chronic illnesses. And every time the daughter fell ill, she had to drop out and miss classes and missed exams. And if you could put people like that into self-paced programs where they can engage at their own time. So time is not the enemy. People can engage at their own time and own pace, then they turn out to be very successful. And in her case, she did turn out to be very successful when she had that opportunity. So I do think we're going to have to be really vigilant about this and really look, as Deb was saying, look at what's happening in particular to female academics and female researchers. I know some universities are stopping kind of tenure clocks during this period. That's important, but that's not enough. We constantly are going to have to examine what's going on and what we have to do to make sure that those people do not fall behind and we do not lose the gains we've made over the last 10 or 20 years.
If I can just quickly comment.
Of course.
And I think we all commented on this during the course of the presentation, the earlier presentation, is that many institutions in Canada have already made an investment, a significant investment to provide a more hybrid form of delivery. And what we're finding is some students, it's actually working for them. It is a bit of an equalizer for students, as Philip noted. Students all come from a different life background, and a hybrid delivery model may be more conducive to their background and their point in time. So that's there, and I would suspect that that is one thing that all of us in post-secondary throughout the country are going to continue to embrace. We'll have to find out how and learn how it will fit into a new normal, however you want to characterize it. But the fact is, investments have been made. There is interest. It's working for some students, not everybody, but it does work for some students. And I think it really falls to us to find a way to fit it into the ongoing program opportunities that universities provide.
Absolutely. Phil, just very quickly, it's interesting, your example was from USNH. They are the single largest distance education provider in the US post-secondary system.
Yeah, no, it's quite extraordinary. He was telling us that the numbers of students have increased from 135,000, I think Debbie said, to 155,000 just over the course of this pandemic.
And this was a little This was
Yeah.
a little college 10 years ago that had 7,000 students on campus. And
Yeah.
now they're delivering courses to hundreds of thousands of students. It's really, really interesting. Doug Lang asked if maybe, and I don't know who's going to have an answer to this. Do you have any comment or any answer why childcare workers who are ECE certified are so poorly paid in relation to the importance of their job?
Deb might have a view on that.
Yeah. Okay. So I do, and I would argue that it's the same thing you see in many professions that are dominated by women, and that is there's a tendency to undervalue the work of women that is systemic in our society, and it doesn't have anything to do with the importance of the work, but you see it in almost every profession where it has flipped from being male dominated to becoming female dominated, that all of a sudden the average salary for those professions go down. So that would be one guess. The other thing is, I think that I'm not sure everybody understands quite how hard the job is, right? It seems like, I have my kid, I, managed to keep them busy. And I think if the last 7 months taught me anything, is that I sure am not a grade 6 teacher. I'm used to teaching, graduate students who are motivated, and not somebody who's in grade 6 who really would rather play Animal Crossing or spend her time on TikTok and doesn't really want to do dictate or anything that I think she should be doing. So I wonder if perhaps some of this may shift as people start to actually recognize how difficult these jobs are and how little you can get accomplished if you don't have appropriate support. So those would be two thoughts on that.
So do you actually think that people being at home with their kids for 6 or 7 months will make them see the light? I mean, I know when my kids were teenagers, I would imagine my older guy, who's just fabulous now, when he was 15, he was horrible. I just imagine, 25 of those 15-year-olds in a room. This just is no good.
Oh, I don't know, but I can honestly tell you that it is clear to me that I like teaching adults. Because I honestly don't know. I couldn't do it with one, grade 6, and she's in a class, I think last year, 22. I don't have those skills. And so, I think it's an incredibly difficult job. And that just the sheer demands on your time, the 1,000 questions, those kinds of things are not obvious when you drop your kid off at school every morning, that's what's going on, right? Or even at daycare. And so it was obvious to me as an incredibly privileged president of a university that my job was so much harder with my child at home.
Michael, can I actually, the same question can be asked about long-term care aides, for instance, in long-term care facilities. We've got a similar challenge there as well when we look at how COVID-19 has impacted, purely from a health perspective, the impact it's had in long-term care homes, especially in Canada, has been substantive. And the value that we place on care for the elderly is something that I think we will all become much more acutely aware of in the months ahead. But similar to early childhood educators, you would probably find, and it's probably for many of the same reasons that Deb, I think, so articulately outlined, we're not, for some reason, placing a monetary value on the type of work that is going on within long-term care homes.
The other thing, of course, we've learned from this is how many people are actually living so close to the bare minimum, and how they're living paycheck to paycheck. The need for government support from a lot of individuals and family was almost immediate. So there are a lot of challenges in addition to those we're talking here today that this pandemic has raised. Lynn Burrows has asked if we'd all like to comment on what all of this means in terms of the changing possibilities for Indigenous learners, and in particular, Indigenous women. I'm sorry, Deb, but I'm going to have to call on you first again.
Okay. Well, you know, what I would say is that I would first recognize that all three institutions that are represented here today have tremendous reputations for promoting participation by Indigenous people. And they've used a variety of techniques that have actually been copied by other groups as well. But I would say that having programs that are tailored for Indigenous people, like UVic's Indigenous Law Program, having visible signs of Indigenous success at your institution. You know, is, you know, I wasn't, Chris, I'm one of your alumni. I wasn't your best student, but turns out that I persisted, and having visible signs of women who are successful and have leadership roles who are Indigenous also promotes that belief that you can do it. And then I think also just having the kinds of support systems that say you're welcome from the word go, that actually examine the invisible barriers. We saw a decrease this year in some of our Indigenous participation. And I thought it was for one reason, and I put it down to the digital divide. That was a really easy answer for me. And then I started talking with our director of Indigenous education to see what she thought was going on and how we could get at it. And she said, you want to know, one of the things that happened with the pandemic is that already stretched bands and nations are even more stretched. And so some of our students didn't enroll because they couldn't get a letter from their band or nation office on time to say they had the money to pay their tuition. And our deadlines are you have to pay by day 10 or you're out. Right? So what we need to do is actually examine our own rules about how you participate and maybe stretch that a little bit during a pandemic to say, we know your nation will get you that letter sooner or later, you know, and we'll figure it out together. So sometimes it's even simple things like our own rules stop people from believing that they can participate because we say, you need this money by this date, and people believe us when we say that, right? So those would be some thoughts.
Just maybe a comment from me, Michael, on this. I'm very proud to say our convocation next week, our two top students, one is the Governor General's gold medal and the other is the Lieutenant Governor's silver medal, are Indigenous women. And we have a cohort of Indigenous women here who are doing extremely well, and we need to continue to build on that success. You know, and really examine internally what it takes. You know, as Deb mentioned, sometimes our rules and our processes get in the way here. So we need to listen deeply and understand what are the conditions for success. And if something like the pandemic is disrupting some of those conditions, let's figure out what they are and move ahead and address them, because I am worried that we will lose progress on this front. I'm also worried, though, about Indigenous men, and you know, most of our students actually are Indigenous women. So there is a bit of a gap there, and it's also something I know collectively the three institutions have done work on and are beginning to better understand what some of the challenges are for Indigenous men to come into post-secondary as well. We're working hard to indigenize curriculum right now. We've had a team of Indigenous scholars working with us for a few months. And I think things like that, as Deb's pointed out, are really important signals to the Indigenous community that this is a welcoming place. And in fact, that the learning that occurs here is reciprocal. We learn as much from Indigenous students and Indigenous scholars as they will learn here. And you know, ultimately, this is a really important partnership, and so bringing together Indigenous ways of learning and of knowing will just greatly enrich our approaches here too.
And how disproportionate? Sorry, Deb, please.
I just want to add one last little bit that Philip made me think about, and that is this too. When a nation or a band chooses to send a student off to your institution, nobody sent us their worst learner, right? Everybody sent us their best learner. And when we send them home at Thanksgiving because they haven't done well, or they haven't paid, or they haven't done that, we're not just sending a message to that learner, we're sending it to their whole nation, right? If their best learner wasn't good enough for us, what does that say about anybody else too? So we also have to look at retention and that piece as well. And so Philip just twigged that thought in my head too.
And Philip, what are you doing to promote these two women that are the winners of the medals? Because that's one small way to address the observation you just made, Deb. Where people are successful, to really make a fuss about it.
So we've had a great social media campaign the last couple of weeks, profiling them on all of our social media channels. We've worked with the Lieutenant Governor as well. So, you know, she will be part of our convocation. We've had the great good fortune this convocation we'll be giving an honorary doctorate to Dr. Bonnie Henry, which we've announced previously. So there's actually quite a bit of buzz around this particular convocation and these particular students as well. And you know, I just think we need to do more and more of that. And I just reiterate the point Deb made. It is so important, the signal we send back to communities. It really is, because it's those networks and it's that word of mouth which is so important. If Indigenous students are going back into community and talking about how supportive and welcoming a place and a space is, it makes all the difference and helps kind of build confidence as you move forward.
Now, do each of you think along those lines, I hear a lot of talk in the United States about there being a gender divide on remote learning as opposed to in-person learning, and a cultural divide on remote learning versus in-person learning. Are you finding that?
Michael, would you just elaborate a little bit about the nature of that divide?
Yeah, well, a lot of the universities that we work with find that women are much more patient, willing to adapt to new circumstances. Often the men are more frustrated on the one hand, and on the other hand, there's almost a culture, but certainly a socioeconomic divide with people's technological skills, but more importantly, the equipment and the access they have. So they're seeing a lot of differences in who's affected most negatively by all of this.
Yeah.
You know, I cannot comment on the cultural or the gender divide. One thing that I will comment on, however, is maybe it's a divide by demographics and age. So traditional 18 to 24-year-olds, that traditional cohort that attend university in person, looking for that full immersive experience, that away from home experience. I think we saw the stories nationally throughout the country, how those students were really struggling to deal with the social isolation of remote learning. We have, I mentioned earlier, 40% of our residence spaces are occupied right now. We know that there is a great number of students who have chosen to come to Victoria, even though they're from away, because they want to be here for their educational experience. And what we saw in the early days was those students coming together and gathering, looking for that social connection. And we saw this in particular at University of Western Ontario as an example. There was a lot of stories that came out about students partying in the community as an example. And really the lesson here is that students are looking for those social connections. And I think as a university, as a community, we have to try and provide that ability to connect socially, because that is one of the big pieces that students are choosing to come to university for. Yes, they're getting a credential. Yes, they're getting that academic and that research experience, but they're also, there's a social experience that we have to be respectful of as well. And providing the supports to students as it relates to mental health, as it relates to that social connection is very important for us.
Yeah.
And often university students, sorry, Phil, but often university students, this is their first experience in that group. This is their first experience living away from home.
Yeah.
being on their own, being self-supportive, and to take that away is a difficult challenge. Sorry, I interrupted you, Phil. I apologize.
No, not at all, Michael. I mean, just picking up on Chris's point, you know, the academic off-course experience is really important to students, but the social experience is equally important as well. And I just think we need to be very conscious of the fact that this is being disrupted and the consequences of that disruption. And it's a really serious issue. Another anecdote Deb and I heard this morning from, just back to your original question, we heard this morning from the University of Southern New Hampshire, where you've got, when you've got 155,000 students, you can use AI very effectively, the kind of analytics in AI very effectively to sort of gauge what's happening with your student body. And one thing Paul LeBlanc mentioned was that they noticed that a lot of the African-American students were logging on after midnight or in the very early hours of the morning. So then they surveyed them specifically to ask why that was the case. It turned out, you know, you're all confined to home. There's one computer. There are siblings, you know, who need access to that computer. And so it raised for me the kind of question about, are we doing enough to survey our students to actually really understand what the barriers and the impediments are? I mean, we've done a couple of student surveys, but in fact, one is going out this week, and I'm taking a really hard look at it now to make sure we're asking the right kind of questions so we can understand this. We don't have the kind of student body or the capacity to do the kind of AI analytics necessarily, but because we're small, we can do this in a more kind of in-person, hands-on way. But just reiterates the importance of talking to and listening to students and what's happening in their lives.
You know, the other thing I would add, and it sort of augments what both Chris and Philip have said, is that the campus is a great equalizer. We're an access institution at VIU, and many of our students live at or near the poverty level. And they don't want people zooming into their house, right, to see what their house looks like. They may not. Another thing 18 to 23-year-olds do is explore their sexuality. They may not want their parents hearing them at the kitchen table talking about these kinds of things. Some of the things that our learners do may not be safe in their home communities, in their homes, or it may cause them to feel as if their friends may judge them differently, right? And again, these are all things that I think we're going to have to spend the next while learning about and trying to figure out how to deal with, because 18 to 23 is one of the last great social development stages of transitioning to full adulthood in a meaningful way to have a healthy and good life. And so we need to figure out how to make sure that we can provide the kinds of experiences that many of them would have had if they were on our campus in a safe way, that actually allows them to explore, take risks, take chances, without necessarily having somebody watching them or having somebody see how they live.
Those are really important points, Deb. You know, there's for social scientists, we all worry about survey research because there's the lean-in factor and there's the shame factor, and there's whether you're getting honest answers, and then you add that to people who may not want to share. And then the thing I was hinting at a little earlier is we've done a lot of research, and there's a really interesting study out of Stanford about how trusting people are of making online declarations or statements, simply because when you say things online, you don't really know who's listening. You don't know whether that will be on the internet, you know, forever, which is really the time frame we're talking about. So there are additional challenges that we sometimes forget, whether it's their personal circumstances, their comfort level, their anxieties, if you want to use that language. And again, especially in that group, that early adult group, a lot of those issues are front and center anyway. Hybrid learning, remote learning, or not. Those are issues that they're dealing with every single day. I think, the last question, and I think we do have a time limit. The last question, I think, is maybe maybe if we could all think a little bit about what the impact of the modest return of international students, if it's modest, has had on your institution. And this is actually from Jill Bester, not from me. Thanks, Jill.
Well, in our instance, we are staying online, our programming online until December. We are going to begin returning to some face-to-face programming in January with international students. Having said that, we do have international students who are returning to Canada. So they're returning to campus in the sense that they're not returning to face-to-face programming necessarily, but returning to use campus services and that. And we've worked very closely with UVic and Camosun on Southern Vancouver Island to meet those students, to make sure that they can meet all their quarantine requirements and they've got the supports they need through all of that. So it's actually gone very well. The numbers are quite small still. January will be the real test for us when we return to face-to-face programming, and we need to do that for our international students because a lot of our international students come because it's a pathway to citizenship, quite frankly, and their eligibility for the postgraduate work permit is a critical factor in their decision to enroll in programming. The federal government's been quite flexible in terms of policy and regulation, but there are still some thresholds that students will need to meet. The interesting thing is the international student demand is still there. There've been a lot of deferrals. That's why we've seen declines and that's why we've taken revenue hits. But the demand is certainly there. And we believe we can do this safely, that we can return to limited face-to-face programming in January. Now, of course, we'll have to monitor the situation very carefully in terms of the pandemic and be prepared to pivot if we need to pivot. And it takes quite a lot to get there, to get all of the staff and the faculty there as well. And that's why we're going to begin slowly and see how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Last word, Chris?
Well, just along those lines, I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is the value that international students bring to all of our communities as well. Mm. They add that cultural diversity. They really enhance the fabric of our community. And we're fortunate, very similar to what Philip alluded to, in that many international students actually chose to stay in the country when this all started way back in March. New students have been challenged in coming into Canada, but I think the federal government has recently made some changes that is going to allow us to welcome international students back. But that is a piece that we don't want to lose, is just recognizing the value of the diversity and the inputs that international students bring to our communities.
Deb?
I guess the only thing I would say that would be different than either Chris or Philip said is that we never stopped having students on our campus because of the nature of the programming we do. We have about 20% of our offerings having some form of face-to-face contact, whether that's in the trades where it's a week on, a week off with theory, hybrid learned, and then the practical piece that way, nursing, dental assistant, dental hygienist, all of these programs. And so what we're doing is we're working, as are my colleagues, to come back to a gradual return to face-to-face instruction. And that's really what our international students are telling us they want, right? They want the in-Canada experience. If they wanted to study online, they could have done that through a number of very reputable online universities across the world. And what they wanted to do was to be here. And so I'm really hopeful that January will show a shift to getting us a little closer to getting the kinds of experiences our learners want. And then over time, we'll just start to build and build and build until we can actually get to the best of both worlds. Because I really don't think hybrid learning is going away. I think people like the face-to-face contact with their instructors and those sorts of bits and pieces. But people are also cognizant now, I think, really cognizant of the fact that when I have a cold, I probably shouldn't go to class, but I still want to get that content. Right. So I think that this is a way that we're going to maybe see some shifts that way as well, to actually get maybe the best of both worlds there. That doesn't minimize the effort that it will take to change that model a little bit, but I think we'll get there. So that would be my last word.
Well, let's end there. Thank you again for all of this and for everybody for contributing. Let me end on a really positive note. Why wouldn't anybody want to be on beautiful Vancouver Island? I mean, really. You've always got that going for you. I woke up to snow here in Ottawa this morning. So frankly, I wish I was on Vancouver Island. Thank you all for taking your time on this, your beautiful day. And thank you, Deb and Phil and Christopher. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye now.
Take care.